The morning I signed the papers, the sky was the same shade of dull pewter as the day I buried my father. I remember noticing that, not because I was looking for omens, but because the light outside felt like it had been deliberately dimmed for the occasion, as if the universe wanted me to grieve in a muted palette. The air was still, heavy in a way that pressed against my skin, and I could feel the weight of the day in my bones long before the pen touched the paper. The envelope lay on the kitchen counter, its contents waiting for the final scrawl of my name, but it might as well have been a coffin. I walked past it 3 times, pretending to be busy with small, meaningless tasks, wiping the same corner of the counter, rearranging spoons in a drawer, folding a dish towel I'd already folded, anything to avoid the moment that would make this ending real. It's strange how a life can shrink into a few sheets of paper. Years of moments, arguments, touches, silences, dreams, all flattened into a sterile document written in a language that doesn't capture the way my heart used to beat when I heard his key in the door. It says nothing about the slow erosion, the little fractures that appeared long before the first real crack. Nothing about the way I used to stay awake in the early years just to watch him sleep, nor about the way I later lay awake for entirely different reasons. And nothing about the moments when I knew, deep down, that I had already lost him, even when he was lying next to me. I wasn't always like this, wary, guarded, hollow in places I didn't know could be hollow. I once believed in permanence. I once thought love was a kind of anchor. I was wrong. Love, I've learned, can be as temporary as the warmth left in a cup of coffee after someone walks away. The first time I noticed the shift was so small I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. He had come home late, much later than usual, and instead of the easy smile he used to wear, his eyes slid past me as though I were a piece of furniture he'd forgotten to move. I told myself he was tired. I told myself people change and it doesn't always mean something is broken. But deep inside, a quiet unease had taken root. It grew slowly, like ivy, creeping into the unlit corners of my thoughts, wrapping itself around memories, choking the air from the good ones. We were once a unit, moving through life in sync, our steps unconsciously matching. Then, imperceptibly at first, our rhythm faltered. He began to walk faster, ahead of me, his eyes on horizons I couldn't see. I would catch him staring at his phone with a faint smile, one he never turned toward me anymore. Meals became quiet, not in the peaceful way they used to be, but in the way of strangers sharing a table out of obligation. I told myself every marriage had its seasons, but this one felt less like winter and more like the slow rot of autumn, where the leaves are still beautiful but dead all the same. The breaking point was not a dramatic scene, no shouting, no slamming doors. It was a Tuesday morning, unremarkable in every way except for the silence that sat between us like a third presence at the table. I realized I had not touched him in weeks. Not accidentally brushing his hand, not leaning into him on the couch, not even the absent-minded warmth of sitting close. I thought about reaching out, but something in his posture, a subtle turning away, stopped me. That was the moment I understood that the distance was not a phase. It was a decision. One we had both made quietly, without speaking, by simply choosing not to fight for what we had. When he told me he wanted a divorce, the words were so calm they didn't sound like the end of anything. They sounded like an administrative update, as if he were informing me of a change in office policy. I nodded. I don't know why I didn't cry. Maybe because I had already done all my crying in the months before, in the small hours of the night when he was asleep and I was staring at the ceiling, wondering how a love could vanish without either of us trying to catch it. The weeks that followed blurred into a gray monotony of paperwork, lawyer emails, and dividing things that could be divided. The couch would go to him. The dining table to me. He kept the dog. I thought I would fight for the dog, but when I pictured her looking for him at the door every evening, I realized I couldn't take that from her. We divided our lives like we were splitting an inheritance neither of us wanted but both were required to accept. Friends asked how I was holding up. I gave them the same answer every time: I'm fine. They nodded, relieved, not realizing that fine had become my armor. Inside, I was unraveling in ways I didn't know how to stop. I stopped cooking for myself. I stopped opening the curtains. I stopped wearing colors. My world became beige, gray, and black, as if mirroring the absence inside me. The legal process was slow, each step an echo of finality. Court dates came and went. I sat across from him in rooms that smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant, avoiding his eyes. His tie was always perfectly straight, his hair combed as though this were just another business meeting. I wondered if he felt anything at all. I never asked. I didn't want to know. When the judge's signature finally dried, I went home to a half-empty apartment. His side of the closet was bare, a hollow echo of the space he'd once taken up in my life. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at the absence as though it might speak. It didn't. The first night alone was the hardest. The silence was different, it had weight, density, as if it were pressing down on me. I tried sleeping on my side of the bed, but the emptiness on the other side was too loud. I moved to the couch, curled into myself like something fragile that might break if stretched too far. I kept the TV on, not to watch, but to have a human voice in the room. Days turned into weeks. I learned how to make coffee for one without overfilling the pot. I learned which parts of the city I could walk through without running into places that still smelled like him. I learned that grief isn't always about death. Sometimes it's about learning to live while something inside you is still buried. Months later, I opened the windows for the first time. The air was cool, the kind that carries the faint scent of rain even when the sky is clear. I let it in, all of it, the wind, the noise of the street, the smell of distant bread from the bakery down the block. It didn't fix anything. But it felt like the first breath after being underwater for too long. I kept the papers in a drawer. Not out of sentiment, but because throwing them away felt like pretending it never happened. And I needed to remember. Not to hold on to the pain, but to honor the woman I was before, the one who believed in forever, the one who learned, too late, that sometimes forever is just a season you didn't know had an end date. The day I signed those papers, the sky dimmed. But I've come to understand that the sun doesn't stop existing just because you can't see it.